Hello and welcome. You're watching Money9 News. I'm Krishna Kumar. और आज Money9 News में we're going to be discussing something very important to you. That is your right to privacy. And with WhatsApp taking the Indian government to court over it, we need to understand what is the debate around privacy laws at this stage. Where do you draw the line between the citizens' right to privacy and the state or the government's right to probe or investigate? And to answer all those queries about this entire WhatsApp issue, we have with us Mr. Nikhil Pava, the founder of Media, joining us here on Money9. Nikhil, thank you so much for being with us here on Money9. Straight up, I'm asking a very simple question. Do the new IT guidelines, which came into force on Wednesday, that is yesterday, which mandate social media companies to identify the source of an objectionable message within 72 hours, does this, outrightly violate Articles 14 and 21 of the Indian Constitution as alleged by WhatsApp?
So essentially, does this violate our right to privacy? And that's a tricky question because, when you and I think about it, we would assume that, hey, if there is a terrorist or someone who's committed a crime, we should be able to easily identify them, and WhatsApp should make it easy for law enforcement agencies to identify who has sent that message and what is the content of the message even, right? Who wants to, there is no protection that should be given to criminals. But, the tricky part over here, and which is why WhatsApp has gone to court, is that if WhatsApp was to make this information available to the government, then essentially they would need to re-architect their entire platform to collect this information. And currently, they don't do it for anyone. When they do, and if they have to collect it for that person, then they have to collect it for everyone. So, first question is: do you actually want WhatsApp to collect more information on you and on all the 550 plus million people using WhatsApp, because the government wants to catch that one person who might be, or those 100 people who might be, criminals, and they might need information on? So the second question is this proportionate? Is it okay to violate the privacy of everyone to catch one person, right? And so these are fundamental questions which courts need to decide. And many of us don't trust WhatsApp. We don't like these updates that we've received about its privacy policy. But this is not about WhatsApp. In Feb, many people switched to Signal away from WhatsApp because Signal is far more private. You can trust that Signal will not share your data with Facebook or host your data on Facebook servers, etc. Right? But the point is, these laws, the way they apply to WhatsApp, they also apply to Signal. So in effect, WhatsApp is going to court to also protect Signal. So I think we should leave our distrust of Facebook and by consequence our distrust of WhatsApp aside and say, on principle, is there a problem with the government asking for any platform to collect data about all of us? And I think not. So I do think that these rules violate privacy and that they would have and it's a disproportionate sort of implementation or disproportionate ask to violate the privacy of everyone to be able to catch a few people.
WhatsApp has called the new guidelines and this particular part of the new guidelines completely straightforward unconstitutional, whereas the government has said that the right to privacy is not absolute and it comes with reasonable restrictions.
Yes.
Tell us, what does the Constitution say in letter and spirit about this?
So in letter and spirit, there is no right to privacy written into the Constitution, but it's drawn from Article 14 and Article 21. And in that landmark right to privacy judgment, and let's not forget, our government had opposed the idea of a fundamental right to privacy. In that judgment, the Supreme Court had said that the reasonable restriction to privacy is that it may be violated for a legitimate purpose, backed by law, and with necessity and proportionality. So I've already pointed out that this is not proportionate. The purpose for trying to get this information of that criminal might be a legitimate purpose. But the problem is, It's not backed by law. Nothing in the IT Act actually allows the Indian government to ask WhatsApp to determine the originator of a message. And so, since they haven't amended the law, these rules are effectively, not in consonance with the law. And so I do believe that WhatsApp is right over here. The government has been trying to bypass Parliament. It doesn't have the backing of Parliament to ask for traceability. And even if it does, it still can be questioned on proportionality. A law passed by Parliament can still be challenged in the Supreme Court, saying, is it proportionate or not? And I don't think it is proportionate.
Right. Now, I'm asking all these questions to arrive at a very simple point, which is the viewers, the users who are watching this. Do the new IT policy guidelines of India, violate the right to privacy of its citizens?
And that's what I was explaining. I think they do violate our right to privacy. I do think that our government is trying to compromise the platforms that protect our privacy. See, today, for example, there is a centralized monitoring system which is used by the government of India for surveillance. It is able to track regular phone calls and it is able to track SMSs. And this data also the SMS data has to be stored by mobile operators and can be accessed by the government. This is still, this has led to people using more of WhatsApp and more of secure platforms like Signal because they don't want the government to be snooping on everything. What we don't have, and what again the right to privacy judgment had asked for, was surveillance reform. So instead of trying to provide surveillance reform so that our investigating agencies, especially since there is constant friction between state and center, and the central government could be snooping on people, even in those circumstances, there is no surveillance reform, there is no judicial oversight over surveillance. People, and it is these platforms that keep us secure. So in order to protect our privacy, it's important to protect the platforms that protect our privacy. And that's why I hope that, number one, the Indian government will lose this case and that these rules will be declared ultra-virus, they'll be declared unconstitutional. And number two, I hope the Indian government will learn a lesson from this and bring about surveillance reform, because as citizens, we expect that we are not being snooped upon by the government all the time.
Nikhil, you're talking about other platforms like Signal, and WhatsApp's privacy policy was an issue for the users. I was one of the few, one of the many, in fact, who moved on to Signal. Have a group of my childhood friends on Signal. We just did it because we weren't in agreement with what WhatsApp was doing. And today you have a stage where WhatsApp, even now, it has this massive user base because of its end-to-end encryption. The faith in its end-to-end encryption is the reason why, despite the fact that you have options like Signal and Telegram, WhatsApp still dominates this market heavily. And it's that end-to-end encryption that the government is asking WhatsApp, that principle be overlooked. Is it unfair to ask WhatsApp to overlook that principle only in special extreme cases of, say, national interest?
So here's what, right? It's not just WhatsApp. End-to-end encryption is actually developed by the people who made the Signal app. It's called the Signal protocol. WhatsApp uses the Signal protocol. The same rules that would apply to WhatsApp will also apply to Signal. And in that sense, like I said, if these messaging apps have to be able to give that information for that one user that is found to be a criminal or is infringing, and the law enforcement agencies have a legitimate need for information about that one user, the protocol doesn't allow it. So the entire WhatsApp platform, the entire Signal platform will have to be re-architected. Even if you don't like WhatsApp's privacy policy, you can go to Signal. But this will apply to Signal too. And so I'm glad that WhatsApp has gone to court, because it's also fighting for Signal in this case.
Fair enough. But WhatsApp is fighting this case at a time when it itself is seeking to share its user data with its parent company, Facebook. And that has raised, privacy concerns of a different kind. It's a bit ironic, isn't it? No,
it's a big problem, and I think WhatsApp should withdraw this particular privacy policy. I don't think it should force it on users. In the European Union, they are not sharing this data with Facebook, and I think the same should be in India. But European Union has an advantage over India, a very simple advantage. it has a privacy law called the GDPR. The Indian government has been for the last, it's taken it 2 years and it's still not passed a privacy law. So I would say before even asking for WhatsApp to break into an encryption and do the surveillance and do the surveillance setup, I do think that we should have a privacy law first to protect citizens' privacy. So this sharing wouldn't be a problem if we had a privacy law. WhatsApp couldn't share the data.
All right, fair enough. That's the next question I wanted to ask you about. What is the global template? You've seen these, massive face-offs between big tech giants and countries across the world on different, aspects of social media. But when it comes to
Yes.
The right to privacy, where does one draw the line between, as I was saying, the right to privacy of the citizen and the right to probe of the state? Where does one draw the line? Because there's clearly no one particular model that's working completely.
So I think there are a bunch of questions there. One is that these platforms have become very powerful. About 10, 15 years ago, there were many platforms and they used to compete with each other. And then now you've had a market consolidation. Some platforms are very huge and some are very small. And so with more users and larger scale, these platforms become all the more powerful and they have an impact on our democracies. So we need to control the power of these platforms. In the same way, we also need to control the power of the government over these platforms, because we use these platforms for our own personal purposes where we don't want the government necessarily snooping on us. So in this battle between government and platforms, citizens shouldn't get crushed. Now, but governments want more power, and even globally, the Five Eyes, which is the US, UK, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, which share surveillance intelligence with each other, have asked Facebook not to implement end-to-end encryption across its platforms. Now, end-to-end encryption would basically secure our communication on more than just WhatsApp and Signal. So it's good for us, but governments still want to surveil, and so that's not good for us. As citizens, as people, we have to ask the question, what do we want? Is being able to catch one person or maybe a group of evil people or a group of criminals worth compromising the privacy of all of us? I would say not. And I do think that governments need to work harder to be able to investigate things. The solution for being able to catch criminals is not to surveil all the citizens all the time. That is a dystopian state.
Right.
That is a panopticon situation, and we can't
Right.
enjoy our
Nikhil,
freedoms in this situation.
Right, Nikhil, in this case, we are talking about a qualified exceptions, and that's where the government has been saying that summarily we're not asking for information to be shared with the government. With the rising threat of terrorism, with the rising threat of even cyber terrorism, so to speak, you need some kind of this is one way in which using technology to catch culprits in society. That's the argument against it.
But Krishna, for that we need to have an understanding of technology. We need to have a consultation, a discussion with the government and the platforms and citizens of what is the best way to do this. We also need protection from surveillance. If there is adequate protection from surveillance, then perhaps some of these systems and there's adequate oversight of how governments behave. Remember, governments are not always working with citizens or in the interest of citizens. There is often surveillance in many authoritarian states. These are serious problems. You can't expect a platform to re-architect its global platform because in your country you feel that where you don't have surveillance reform, where you don't have adequate oversight, that you need to be able to catch terrorists. I think we need a balanced approach from the government as well.
All right. One last thing before I let go of you. Just want to quickly ask you. Do these things, these big kind of sparring face-offs between the government and a big tech company like WhatsApp or Facebook, do these hurt the image of India as a country for countries to invest? There's so much talk of ease of doing business, but this really goes against it. Issues like these.
So if you look at the IT rules as a whole, they give the government a disproportionate amount of control over the internet, not just over large platforms like WhatsApp and Facebook, etc., but also over streaming services like Netflix and Amazon, over news organizations, online blogs, independent news entities. So the kind of control that the government is exerting over the internet will naturally mean that there is less freedom to act, there is less freedom to create. Creativity is going to get stifled, freedom of expression is getting stifled, and the compliance burdens that come in because of this are substantive. I mean, imagine a platform with, let's say, 500 million users like WhatsApp. If even if 0.001% of its users file complaints, and according to these rules they have to deal with it in 15 days, it's they that's about 500,000 complaints to deal with. So that's such a large number that it's a significant cost. It actually strengthens larger platforms. So the ease of these large platforms can still conform to these rules, but a small platform cannot. A new platform cannot. It's a high cost. So in fact, these rules are consolidating power in the hands of larger platforms and larger players, and they're affecting the ease of starting up, the ease of competing against large platforms, because the government compliance burdens, the red tape is increasing so much now. We are becoming a lot more like China because of these rules, and I hope that these rules get struck down in court.
All right, then I'm afraid we'll have to leave it at that because we've completely run out of time on this conversation. But Mr. Nikhil Pava, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here on Money9 and sharing your thoughts and views on an issue that affects so many of us. Thank you for speaking to us. With that, it's
Thanks,
a wrap here on this edition.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. And with that's a wrap here on this edition of Money9 News. Thank you so much for watching. This is Krishna Kumar signing off.